Welcome to another episode of the Thunderstock Show, a collection of valuable brainstorms to enhance your life, liberty, and pursuit of property. In this series, we're going over people that are familiar, not just familiar, but professionals with EOS. Today's special guest is Don Hahn. Don lived in Buffalo, New York, and now he's in Denver, Colorado, with over 2 decades of experience with executive business coaching. He was at one point fractional. He was a EOS implementer, and now he is an EOS integrator. And I promise there's a difference, which we'll go over. Don, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about you, Ross?
I get to interview EOS and business coaches. It's one of my favorite things to do. I'm having a great day.
Good for
Don,
you.
typically when people choose a college major, there's not usually a major for executive coaching. And if there is, I would be surprised. So what did you go to school for, and what did you want to do when you were growing up?
Well, I was always intrigued with business. I want to run my own business, so I got my Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from the University of Buffalo. That was a long time ago.
Mhm.
So I graduated there in 85. So it's been a long journey.
What did you do after you got out of school? What was your first career move?
Well, right when I got out of school, I got a job as a customer service manager at a manufacturer. Um, but then I fell into telecom. I was in telecom for many years, working at MCI and Global Crossing. I spent about 15 years in that. And then in the year 2000, my boss came to me and said, Don, we have to do a reduction in force, which is typical in
Mhm.
telecom. And I said, okay, what do we got to do, Carl? And he said, well, Don, your operating budget's going to go from 11.8 million to 1.7 million. And then I was like, wow. So when I picked myself up, I let all my people, I had to let them go, and then I re-engineered everything. I was doing sales operations for the company, so CRM and
Mhm.
recruiting, hiring, playbooks, all that.
Yeah.
And I said, look, I didn't come here to let 70 people go. I'm going to parachute out as well, which I did.
Oh,
That was 2000.
that's
And
tough.
then you want me to continue and just talk about how I got
Yeah,
here?
I mean that's a tough look, man.
Oh, yeah.
All I'm giving commentary on is I can't imagine knocking off an entire zero of a budget and having to let 70 people go at one time. Anytime I think that's one of the hardest parts emotionally for someone in leadership is to let good people go because of factors outside, you know?
Yep. It was
So
it was brutal. It was a dark day. And so I went out, I parachuted out. And because I was doing a lot of sales stuff, I bought a Sandler sales franchise.
okay.
And for 15 years, I ran a Sandler franchise in Buffalo. I did leadership development, sales leadership, and sales. I did masterminds. I'm very much in the Napoleon Hill's thought process. Um,
I
then I
just looked
found out,
up,
if I'm, go
Don,
ahead.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just looked up at my bookshelf and I see Napoleon Hill staring at me. His book, the Laws of Success, which I need to pick up and maybe dust off after we're talking.
Yeah, yeah.
Can I
He's got,
ask you what about Napoleon Hill? Like when did you get introduced and how was that transformative to you?
oh God, I'm an avid reader. I'm very theoretical, so I'm constantly reading. My bookshelf is filled with books. Um, I don't know. I was introduced to him in the 90s, I guess.
Hmm.
And yeah, Think and Grow Rich and all the good uh, books that he wrote, and I enjoyed it. And I loved his concept of, you know, a mastermind and his affirmations of, you become what you think. And these
Hmm.
all were profound to me. And then that got me thinking, um, adopting those things. And in fact, I took his concept of a mastermind and I created a program called the corporate mind. And the corporate mind is I help people today create a mastermind within their company. I call it the corporate mind. and it's alignment and focus, providing a single-mindedness of purpose and an ability to filter out distractions and focus on what's important. And it causes a motivated and mobilized team to act at all times in support of the corporate mission. And so I've taken that and I looked at it and I said, well, there's really 5 key things that managers have to do for leaders. And because, the name of my company is Champ Trainer, I train champions, and Champ is the 5 focuses that I teach in the corporate mind, which is, as an executive, you got to coach, you got to hire well, you got to hold people accountable and assess them, then you got to manage it, and then you got to plan. If you do all 5 of those things correctly and you communicate effectively, it's a game changer. It's not as good as EOS, but it's pretty darn good. So,
Well, I was going to ask if CHAMP was an acronym. I do love those. It's an easy way to remember. And as
yeah,
you were saying it, I was trying to guess the letters. So,
yeah.
um, super
Coach, hire,
helpful.
assess, manage, plan.
If you
If you
if
do
you
those
got 5
5,
fingers, yeah.
yeah, it's a simple concept. And so each of those I drill into deeper. I help people. Most people don't understand how to coach. They really don't. And they're promoted into their position. If they're doing LMA
Hmm.
within EOS, they don't have a clue how to do it. They rose up from the ranks. They may have been a great press operator and supervisor, but then they get there and it's like, oh my God, I got to lead, and they don't know how. So I help them to become better coaches. They do a lot of coach training, and I also help them get the right people in the right seats. Um, the benefit that I have or that I bring to the table is I'm certified in psychometric assessments. So DISC, motivators, values, emotional quotient. And I use those tools because it helps define the comfort zone of the person I'm coaching. It definitely
Mm.
does. It's a lifetime of coaching with the assessments. Um, and I use that to help people get unstuck. And the beauty of the assessments is they're really irrefutable. Um, it it presents things in a way that you've never ever considered it. We can't see ourselves through, as others see us, and this gives the opportunity to do that. Then leading into more on EOS, managing people. What are the standards? And I find a lot of companies don't have accountability. They don't hold. I met with a guy yesterday, and he's got a $2 million company, and he's struggling. He goes home every night, and he feels like it got hit by a truck, and he didn't move the needle.
Mm.
Okay. Um, and then the next morning he gets up and does it again.
Right.
And that is the E-myth. Okay. So I help people step
Mm.
outside of that and get a different perspective. And I believe the accountability chart in getting the right people in the seats is everything. So the 2 foundational pieces of EOS that I think are critical and have to get done right is the accountability chart and then right people, right seats. And um, then you can create accountability. Okay? So in my mind, accountability is the intersection of 3 things, without which, if they don't intersect like a Venn diagram, it won't work. But those 3 areas are, number one, what's the standard of performance? What's expected of the person?
Right. Right.
Secondly, what are the consequences if you succeed or if you don't succeed? And then what's the feedback mechanism? If you do all those 3 things, you have accountability. But if you lack one of them, or these circles do not intersect and you don't get that sweet spot, you're not going to have accountability. And I see that's a big issue with a lot of companies. They just don't hold their people accountable.
Man. There was a lot covered there, and I've got a few questions, but I think the first one I'll start with is the
Yeah.
psychometrics. How, you've now gone over several instances where you've done the Sandler training and the psychometrics and EOS, and you're really an example of a lifelong learner, someone that has, just evidenced by your bookshelf you mentioned.
Hmm.
And typically, when I talk to people, there's three buckets. There's haven't picked up a book since high school. I just want to get my hands dirty and learn it the hard way, right?
Hmm.
There's I found a thing and I'm gonna rock it and I'm gonna do everything in that lane. So EOS could be an example. They have the traction library and all the books accommodated, but they don't really venture forth outside of there. And there's the
Right.
people that are like me that have so many books that if they try to read them all again twice, they would take another lifetime.
Right.
So I I like to be somewhere in the Venn diagram, closer, further on the high fact finder, the big time reader.
Hmm.
But it started, I'll tell you, I still remember my first professional personal development book, which was Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, and I was a senior in high
Oh,
school.
yeah.
But do you remember your first professional development? Like it started somewhere.
Yeah. I would say, I don't know if it's professional, personal development, but professional development would be In Search of Excellence by Tom Peters.
Okay.
I thought that was great. And because at the time, I was working for MCI, and MCI was one of the companies that, he cited in it. And it was really interesting read. I found out we were a bunch of kids because I was a kid at the time, and we had a loose alignment to what we wanted to do. So at least we had that going for us. And then we were empowered to do it. And to me, that was good. The other one was probably Blue Ocean Strategy, that I liked. But geez, I'm looking up here and trying to look at the ones. Another good one was by Dr. Susan Jeffers, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. I don't know if you've read that one.
No, I have not.
Susan Jeffers says, look, if you're changing, you're going to feel uncomfortable. So fear is going to be a constant companion if you're outside of your comfort zone. Successful people will embrace that fear and push through it because the consequences, the remorse, and the feelings of failure are worse than just feeling the fear and doing it anyway. But it's a great book. And it speaks to the principles that I teach is that most people, they get outside their comfort zone, man, and they shut down.
It reminds me of a
And
quote that I'll misattribute, but it's essentially goes like, I'm too much of a coward to not be brave, for I know the consequences.
ah,
And I don't know who said it, but I often recite and remember that as well because
mhm. I think
Joseph
that's very,
Campbell,
very strong. Yeah.
the hero's journey, it's the cave that you fear to enter is that which holds the treasure you seek. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, interesting. So it started there, and then with Sandler's sales training, you do operational training because you're a fractional integrator, which for those
Yep.
of you that are not as familiar with the EOS nomenclature as perhaps Don and I, you have at the top of an organization EOS, your visionary and your integrator, and they're complementary, and sometimes when they're working together, they hold one another, with a great symbiosis, they can really drive a company forward. But if you have two people that are wired to be integrators and two people that are wired to be visionaries, it's almost like a magnet with different polarities where you're kind of repellent. So, at what point did you identify that sales leadership was you had a good run, but then you wanted to be an integrator? Because traditionally, when I think of either disc profiles or Colby assessments or Myers-Briggs, those are typically two different profiles. So how did you make that jump?
Yeah. That's a good question. Um, there's so many similarities with sales management, sales leadership, and leadership and management in general.
Mhm.
And I am a student of the industry. I believe that people are your most valuable asset. So I don't care if they're sales, I don't care if they're operations. People operate in a manner consistent with their comfort zone. So to be able to help them understand what's holding them back and then open up their eyes to new opportunities, it's coaching. And it's position agnostic, it's industry agnostic, it's just good principles that work throughout. And I got really turned on by the operational part. So I was doing fractional chief sales officer before fractional became a word.
Mhm.
And then it always led to, hey, what's your strategic plan? Well, then I developed a strategic planning and implementation process. This was before I got into EOS. And I did a lot of that. And so I found I liked that more than sales. I just enjoyed it more because it really affected the entire organization. EOS, or strategic planning and implementation, is really the essence of a company, and matching that culture up with the people and getting them to execute is really critical. So it's not that I dislike sales. I did it for a long time, and I kind of outgrew the Sandler franchise.
Mhm.
Um, and then I started cutting my teeth on, got my coaching certification, then my psychometric assessments, um, and I just like that more. So I sort of set the sales by the side. So
That's
yeah,
interesting. And one thing that is important to point out in that assessment is that coaching and management were the things that you enjoyed that might have fit your DNA. You
yeah.
did it as a function in terms of like an organizational unit of sales, but
Hmm.
it wasn't like you were I'm a top producing salesperson who got promoted into management. You were like, I'm doing management that's focused on sales. Now I'm focused on organization. And I
Right.
found that some companies will promote their top producing salesperson to leadership, not just supervisory. Even that jump can be rough, but from sales producer to sales management, I would say in my experience, 10% of the time, it's a great step up. And 90% of the time, that person, what got them to the dance isn't what it takes them further.
Yep.
And it part of it, I believe, and I would like to hear your input, is goes back to the psychometric personality thing, where it's just like the DNA required, or the GWC, whatever you want to label the requirements of what a person, an individual
Yep.
needs to have, changed drastically. So
Yep.
what what are some of the ways that you assess with your psychometrics on right person, right seat, or the accountability chart, the organizational structure as a whole?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's astute of you to see that, because I was a top performing sales rep for years. I mean, really, number one everywhere I went. And because I'm a high D and a
Hmm.
high I.
Me
And
too.
that which made me a great salesperson did not make me, it actually worked against me in management. So I struggled. I mean, I was not a good manager, okay, in my early days. I didn't know. No one told me. And it was because no one really took me under their wing and mentored me or coached me. So back to your question of the psychometrics, I think values are the most important thing, but you can't see them in an interview. So, there's about six primary values that people have. Myself, I'm theoretical and utilitarian, which means I love to learn. And then utilitarian, I don't do anything unless I get an ROI, which is the number one criteria for salespeople.
Hmm.
That's a number one indicator when someone comes out of the gate. Um, but so I think values is important. But if you look at comfort zone, and my assessments allow me to look at someone's comfort zone, which is bound by the techniques they know, which is easy to train, but most people hire for skills, which is totally wrong. The other is behaviors. What are they preconditioned? What do they like doing and what do they not like doing? And that's a function of behaviors. And I coach to behaviors. I train technique, I coach for behaviors, and hire and fire for attitude.
Hmm.
And most people get it wrong. They hire for skills and they say, what happened? And they own that person for, you know, 8 months, 2 years. And then they say, well, they're not the best, but it's better than nothing. And
Mm.
so they don't go down that dark path to go out and find someone. But the right people, right seat requires you to make sure that you have the right people, because that one person screws everything up for many, many people. And the good of the many outweigh the good of the few. I mean, that's my spot analogy. So I don't know if I answered your question. I tend to
No,
talk a
I
lot.
think you did a great job of identifying three different components, which
Mhm.
are, what that which you can train, that which you can coach, and that which is just it has to be a match from the start. And values,
Yeah,
you can't teach character, I don't think.
yeah, yeah. So with my assessments, we'll benchmark a position. I'll sit down for a couple of hours with subject matter experts within the company, and we'll benchmark the position. We'll say, what are the key performance areas? What are they responsible to do? Excuse me. And how are they going to spend their time? What are the things they're going to do? And we benchmark it. And I have them take the assessment as if they were the job. And I get three parties, and we combine it and synthesize it into a job benchmark. And then that's what we're hiring for. Someone brings someone in here. I'm not saying they shouldn't do it. The further the variance, the harder it's going to be, but no one's ever a good fit. So then that assessment that said, we wanted you here, here's where you are, here's the gap, that becomes a coaching process. That behavioralization, and getting that light bulb to go off, man, that's what I love.
So it gets you up in the morning.
Yep.
So I want to make a point where I think that when you have an organization with 100+ people,
Mm-hmm.
you have what I call, the front line or the production specialist. You have your army of salespeople and then appointment setters, and you maybe have machine operators or people that do the operations that are doing the work, and then you have your back room. But every organization, I would say that's at 8 to 10 unit members at least, has some similarities in their org chart, their accountability chart. And I find that the higher up, closer to like the C-suite role or the leadership role, the trickier it is to, how do I say, benchmark like what good looks like, because oftentimes one of my philosophies is that businesses are constrained at the top. So how do you approach the coaching and hiring and training for executives versus
Mm-hmm.
what I call the front line?
Yeah, it's a good question. And entrepreneurs are hard to coach. Okay, they are. They're the hardest people to coach. Um, because the way they got there is they do their own thing. And what I've found is at C levels, very seldom have they done a job description for themselves.
Mm.
So it's whatever they want to do. There's no guardrails. And so the first thing I do is I define the job of that CEO. And you'll find that they do a lot of things they like to do that they can elevate and delegate. They can find their cream rises to the top and then let others do that, but they tend to pick at stuff. And if they don't have a job description, it's whatever they want to do.
Mm.
Um, So I think really it's helping them to understand their role in the company and
Mm-hmm.
help them to execute on that. So first thing I do is I go over a job description. What do you do? And wow, it's all over the place. It really is, Ross. So
So it's almost like the IDS methodology when you're solving problems. First step is identify.
yeah,
You can't solve for something that's not yet identified.
that's right. That's exactly right. And I think IDS is like a game changer. That the L10 and the IDS. I worked with a company that a manufacturing company. They'd have thousands of RMAs, and they'd kept working on it, and it was frustrating because every meeting was consumed by RMAs. And they weren't doing root cause analysis. They weren't doing
Mm,
the theory of constraints and saying, what's the common item here? And how can I create a process that'll fix this? So the whole thing really works together. But I have the luxury of not being part of the system. I
right.
have the beauty of being able to see it for what it is. And Deming says if you're part of the problem, it's hard to become the solution. Um, and I love it.
That's
So
one of the most challenging things, if I can share. What you just said sort of identifies a challenge that I've experienced as a fractional chief marketing officer. There's a balance that a fractional C-suite must strike, and it's being apart enough that they can remain objectivity and not, like you said, becoming part of the problem, but it's being close enough that you can clearly articulate and understand what it is these root causes are.
right.
And I have been in organizations that have wanted at any instance that we could creep past scope of engagement where I could, put essentially working full time, even though we're fractional.
Yeah.
And I didn't find a correlation between successful outcome and time spent. And on the transfer side, organizations where we're right at the scope of time allotment, and I don't sell by hour, but we have some guideline principles.
Hmm.
Those organizations found some of the most impactful change management.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Um, Absence makes a heart grow fonder, but in a much
Exactly.
less poetic and more corporate way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think change is the toughest thing in any organization. And unfortunately, the speed of change is quickening
Yeah,
very rapidly.
yeah.
AI is a game changer. Um, and so we're going to see the rate of change being accelerated. Um, I'm a believer in Singularity University by Peter Diamandis, and he talks about the Internet of Things and the convergence of technology and the fact that, if you aren't adopting AI right now, you're going to get run over. You're just going to become obsolete. So, and helping people understand that and get ahead of it. And that's one example, but I'm just saying in general, how to adopt and put in a CRM or an ERP, which are game changers. And people fearful of it. They really are. And getting them to adopt that change as a team is probably one of the most important things a leader can do is get a change ready organization. Um, and I think that's through their cadence and their communications, and whether a transformational leader or a servant oriented leader doesn't matter, but how do they use that to mobilize and empower their workforce? It's not about micromanagement. It's about sharing the vision. And most guy I talked to the other day doesn't have a strategic plan. He can't articulate his vision. I asked him where he wants to be in 3 years. He had no idea. And these
Mm.
are questions that, as an entrepreneur, you live the E-myth. You join it because you love your craft. Then you wake up, you're going, oh man, I'm not doing my craft anymore. I got to run a business. And so they just jump in and they like to be a plumber as opposed to leading plumbers. Um, and I think
Mm.
it's culture shock. It's a shock for a lot of people. They don't even realize it, and so they're trying to be a super salesperson or a super plumber, whatever it is, and it's not going to work because they're the stopgap to growth.
It
So,
seems like one thing that you've excelled at is providing objective analysis through research and high fact finding, and being able to deliver in a digestible way what some could perceive as scary news, which really just means new information that could facilitate change and growth.
mhm.
One thing I feel compelled to share with you is that when I've talked to other EOS implementers and I've done assessments, um, it's been pretty much clear to them, like, oh yeah, traditional visionary, whether that's a Colby or Myers-Briggs or DISC, whatever, what have you.
Yeah.
What are in your terms some of the signs and signals that have you, in that integrator position, and how do you relate with other visionaries, and what are the things that you look at when you're dealing with that dichotomy, that difference between integrator and visionary?
Yeah. Good question. And I think I'm a I went through Rocket Fuel University. I've graduated, and that talks about specifically how integrators and visionaries work together. And I think you mentioned it earlier. It could either be like this, or it could be like this, or anywhere in between. So it's a matter of, I've got to subjugate myself to the visionary. They're in charge. Um, but I want to take their vision and distill it, because they're not really generally not good at presenting. Some are great at it, but if they aren't, I've got to adapt. Okay. And it's easier for me to adapt than a visionary to adapt. Okay. Because
Hmm.
I don't have the ego. And most visionaries have a strong ego. And I will share this with you. The number one requirement that I require before I would coach someone, they have to have humility. If they don't have humility, I wasted a ton of time trying to coach people that knew it all. They
Mm.
couldn't learn. And so that's a red flag for me. So in my analysis, I really want to understand the first person I assess is the CEO or the C level to determine, are they coachable?
When
Uh,
you say humility, the
mhm,
definition that I carry for humility is that it's thinking of others more than thinking of oneself, not necessarily shrinking oneself, but
mhm,
elevating others. How do you define humility, and what do you look for in someone to determine if they are or not
yeah.
coachable?
In my mind, humility is the ability to learn. It's the ability to listen to others and take what they say and value it. If you don't have humility, you don't value what someone's saying, you already know it. And it becomes very frustrating. Then your integrator and visionary are definitely doing this. But if they are humble and they're open to suggestions from others, to my mind, humility is accepting um, critique, constructive criticism without getting defensive and saying, whoa, yeah, that's not me. I got all these people, they're broken, go fix them.
Mm.
And I heard that a lot. And my early days, I used to just try to fix it. And I'm like, wait, the very person I'm trying to work with is not amenable to change. So if you're going to be open to change, you've got to have humility. You've got to be open to outside ideas and not full of hubris and I know everything and they're
It,
broken. So
it goes
that's
back
my
to what you mentioned earlier, Don, about coaching versus training versus values. And it seems like humility is a non-negotiable value, because you can't,
mhm.
you literally, by what your definition of it is, you can't negotiate with that which is unnegotiable.
Yep.
So it's interesting that you've learned to sidestep engagements when they break your value assessment from the jump. You probably
Mhm.
would save other consultants and other business owners who are hiring many hours of pain if they started with
Oh,
values.
yeah. Yeah. And people don't realize the most important time in your career is when you're assessing and bringing aboard human capital. Okay. Everybody has capital and you have an asset. What's the first thing you do when you buy a car? You start to amortize it. Well, human capital, you don't amortize. Human
Right.
capital appreciates if you invest in them.
Right.
And so that's why I'm a believer if I can get people to do that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. One of the things that I look for, and because I've probably experienced working for others, is that when I'm looking to make a key hire, I always ask the question, what values or skill sets or traits do they have that I do not currently possess? Because the last thing I want to do is an army or an amplification of me.
Yeah,
There's enough of, I find that if everyone had the same disc profile and everyone had the same uh, psychometrics, you would
yeah,
probably not be rowing nearly as cohesively in the same direction. It would be maybe
yeah.
born of too much conflict. So
I agree.
interesting. So
100% I agree is, and we hire one of the chief problems in hiring, because I do a lot of hiring for my clients, is we hire in our own image.
hmm,
We expect to get some other contribution, but you're cloning yourself. And that doesn't lead to growth. You surround yourself with people that challenge you and can do what you can't do. And that's the sign of a great leader that has the humility to release that. So,
I
no,
think one of the tools from EOS, just to interject quickly,
yeah,
if you were to pick one, if I were to pick one, I would choose the IDS tool when it comes to making assessments, because if someone can objectively entertain an idea without taking it personal, right? It's a key component to whether someone has humility or hubris, is
yeah,
how do they, look at the problem when they may be the accountable, responsible party for causing the problem. And if you
right.
look at it like, hey, we're just two human beings having a conversation to come to a solution that will mutually benefit us, versus, if they were to think they have to defend a position versus attack a position, I've found if you can remove the ego from solving problems, then you can do almost anything in terms of learning. But if you can't, and there's unfixable problems, that's where I stop being helpful. If we can't even identify a problem without hurting feelings, we're not going to solve a problem.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's why in level 10 meetings, the egos have to be left at the door. That's one of the primary rules. When you're entering one of those meetings, the ego's gone. It's you're all equals and you're trying to move the organization forward, period. And it's not one-upmanship or anything like that. And I've seen that. And I've had to react pretty quickly to people that try to take over a level 10 meeting because it's not, no one really runs it. You run it cumulatively. And I had one guy, a big engagement I did, he was brilliant. He was a brilliant guy, but a caustic delivery. He upset so many people. We did a employee survey and everybody was ready. They were up in arms. So we had to move him his seat and use his expertise, but get him out of harm's way of the 200 people that were affected by him. And a year later, we did the survey, and it was remarkably different. I mean, one person was hurting the whole company, and they didn't even realize it. He was one of the founders, and it just had to happen. So
Hmm.
we did it right. He was happy. Um, the people in the organization were ecstatic. So
It goes back to another principle, though, Don, where you said, look, if you don't clearly communicate expectations, clearly communicate how you'll be rewarded or corrected, and clearly communicate. I slipping my
feedback.
memory. The
Yeah.
feedback loop.
Yeah.
That's when these things start to happen. Because I've been a part of organizations where, perhaps the visionary said, "This is the standards," right? Just to sum up those three steps. And the integrator didn't emphatically agree, and they had different standards. Maybe they were more lenient or more strict.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when when you're playing the mom and dad, if dad says no, ask mom and she'll come and be sympathetic. It makes both parties, and that's a major negative polarity
Yeah.
where you don't. So I think it starts with agreed upon standards. And I think part of the agreed upon standards, if I had to use another EOS tool, were what are the company core values, right? So you can understand what a value match truly is, right?
Yeah.
If you have people in the leadership team that have different ideas what the core values are, then you're going to have a schizophrenic organization.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And regardless what's happening between a visionary and an integrator, you've got to present a united front. You
Mhm.
absolutely have to for the good of the company. And you have your one-on-ones between your visionary and integrator, and that's where you look at what your IDS and what are the issues. But um, that has to be kept behind closed doors. Any tension, but and I think EOS does a great job of matching up an integrator with a visionary that share the way they approach things, and that's critical. It makes things a lot easier. So
So getting out of the tactics, going at that 30,000 foot view, when you look at the VTO or the end credits of your life, and at the end of the day, once you said, yeah, I've had enough coaching, or I can no longer choose to continue, what
yeah,
are some of the things you look back in your life and hope that you could say to who you are today, and how do you want to reflect on life?
you know, the measure of a man is the legacy he leaves. And my belief, and it's funny, a lot of people don't write mission statements. I've always done it. And we had a guy that came in, and his mission statement was perfect. It was eloquent, concise, and his mission statement, which I've kind of adopted, no regrets,
Hmm.
no regrets. And if you operate in that manner, you're going to be on the right side of the moral compass, the North Star. You're going to be working towards your values, and you can leave this world feeling that you made a contribution. And I don't know what more you'd want. I really don't know what you want. I mean, you lead a purpose-driven life, and in the end, that's your reward is that personal satisfaction. I think.
Of a job well done.
Yeah, yeah.
The last question I have for you, Don, is not nearly as deep. Where can people get a hold of you and contact you if they want to get in touch?
Okay, yeah, they're probably the best thing is I've got a LinkedIn site, Sales Gurus. Um, Also, you can reach me via my website, champtrainer.com, and all my services are in there. But if you want to call me, give me a ring, 716-432-5741, and we'll talk. So, and if someone talks to me and it doesn't fit, that's okay. I'm not desperate. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, then it wasn't meant to be. And it's how you got to look at it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for the conversation today, Don. I truly appreciate it. And for everyone else listening, thank you so much. As always, I'm hoping that these conversations that we have can inspire you to take action to help you to achieve your life's purpose. My only request is that you share the show if you enjoyed it. It's the only way it grows. I never want to run ads. Until next time, be well.